Fallon left without a word. Not really. That's what I told myself for days. But I knew better. That night she didn't say, "I'm done." She didn't shout or slam doors. She didn't even pack a single bag. She just moved through the house like a shadow, present but distant, and left me with the weight of silence pressing down. I was downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table, when I heard her laughter from upstairs. Not the kind we used to share. This was different. Quiet, intimate, like she was with someone else, someone invisible to me. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't stop. That soft laugh echoed through the thin walls, cutting through everything I thought I knew. I tried to pack a bag that night, but my hands betrayed me. The familiar shirts and socks, the scattered memories we'd woven together over years, slipped through my fingers. Each piece felt heavier than the last, as if trying to stay behind. After what felt like hours, I finally zipped the suitcase shut. I looked toward the door to leave, but it wasn't there. Just smooth beige drywall stared back at me like an unbreakable barrier. The room, the house, it had transformed into a trap. That was the moment I realized, even if she was gone, I wasn't free. Days blurred into restless nights. I woke up in cold sweats, heart pounding, haunted by the image of that vanished door. Every morning, I hoped it was just a bad dream. But every time I reached for my phone, I found only emptiness. No calls, no messages from Fallon. Just silence. It wasn't fear I felt. It was something heavier. The suffocating weight of unfinished stories. What had I done wrong? Or worse, what had I never seen coming? I kept replaying the last weeks, the tiny cracks in our conversations, the silences that stretched longer than comfort allowed. I thought maybe I was the only one clinging to a version of us that was already gone. But deep down, something told me the truth was far from simple. I sat down one morning, tired of waiting for answers. I called my lawyer. "Start the paperwork," I said. "I want a clean break." The house was still in my name, legally. I could force a sale or reclaim ownership. But I told him to offer Fallon the chance to buy me out first. If the house meant anything to her beyond convenience, she could keep it. If not, then it was over. Because I was done waiting for a door that didn't exist. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend my life trapped in a house haunted by someone who had already moved on. It was time to look beyond these walls. Time to find out who I was without her. The morning after I called the lawyer, I woke up to the quiet hum of an empty apartment. Fallon's absence was like a physical ache I couldn't shake, a silent echo in every corner. I wandered through the rooms, tracing my fingers along the walls, as if they might tell me something I couldn't hear in words. The beige paint, the chipped wooden floorboards, the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the closet, all reminders that the past wasn't done with me yet. I needed a plan, but all I had was a restless mind and a knot in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook and a cheap map I'd found in a drawer, folded and forgotten. The map was a mess of creases and stains, the kind of thing you'd use to mark places you dreamt of visiting but never dared. I traced my finger over 3 towns, little dots circled in faded red ink: Millmere, Tallow Creek, and Eastgate. Places I'd always been curious about, stories whispered about them but never quite believed. I didn't know what I was looking for in those places, only that I needed to find it. Something different. Something new. But the hardest part wasn't picking towns on a map. It was letting go of the idea that I needed to figure everything out at once. I sat back and pulled out the old green notebook Fallon had given me years ago, the one where I'd written poems and sketches when I still thought we'd last forever. I opened it to a blank page and started writing, not for her, not for anyone, but for me. A letter. "Fallon, we were real. I know that. Maybe you do too. But we stopped seeing each other long before we said goodbye. Asterisk, I wish you peace. I really do. Asterisk. And I hope someday we both become people we would have actually loved." I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of every word, and slipped it into the back of the notebook. I didn't send it. Some messages are meant only for ourselves. The next days were a blur of packing, planning, and restless anticipation. I told myself this was about me, about finding myself again. But every night, when the lights went out, I felt the old ghost whispering behind my ribs. The ghost of us. And the questions I refused to ask aloud. I scheduled road trips, one town at a time. The first was Milmere, a quiet place nestled between two rivers, surrounded by hills blazing with gold and crimson in autumn. I didn't know what I'd find there. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The drive was long, the highway stretching like a ribbon unraveling beneath the wheels. I felt like I was leaving more than a city behind. When I arrived, Milmere greeted me with a calm I hadn't known I needed. A used bookstore with dusty shelves, a diner serving strong coffee and sweeter smiles, crooked sidewalks lined with hand-painted signs that spoke of small-town pride. I rented a small cabin on the edge of town, simple, rustic, with a creaky porch and windows that framed the woods like a painting. No TV. Spotty internet. Just wind, trees, and silence. That silence was terrifying at first. It forced me to listen to the quiet thoughts I'd buried beneath noise and distraction. The ache in my chest. The questions without answers. The memories I tried to lock away. One afternoon, I sat at a cafe sketching the view from the window, the way sunlight spilled through maple leaves, the way the river caught fire in the late afternoon light. A waitress named Lainey paused beside me. "You know, most people just scroll their phones while they wait," she said with a smile. I smiled back. "Most people don't know what they're missing." She tilted her head. "You passing through?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." Over the next few days, we talked. Not much. Not too little. Just enough. No pressure. No expectations. Like two people who had nothing to prove. On my last morning in Milmere, Lainey handed me a small note with my coffee. "If you ever decide to stop passing through, come back and stay a while." I folded it and smiled, the first real one in weeks. "Maybe I will," I said. And I drove west, chasing answers and peace. But I knew, deep down, the real journey wasn't about towns or roads. It was about the parts of myself I'd left behind, the doors I hadn't yet found. The road from Milmere to Tallow Creek was a slow unraveling of old habits and new fears. I drove for hours, the hum of the engine filling the space where silence used to press too close. The map lay folded on the passenger seat, creases softened from use, corners worn like the edges of my patience. I couldn't shake the feeling that this journey wasn't just about places. It was about something darker, something I hadn't yet faced. Tallow Creek was smaller than Milmere, a dot on the map with a single blinking traffic light and a post office that smelled like dust and lost letters. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that hides stories beneath the surface. I rented a room in a rundown motel at the edge of town. The wallpaper peeled in corners, and the faint buzz of a broken neon sign hummed through the thin walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine for the week. The first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows twisting in shapes that felt like warnings. I thought about Fallon, her laugh upstairs in the apartment, the way she was always surrounded by someone else. I remembered the suitcase I tried to pack in that dream. The socks and shirts falling out, memories I couldn't contain. I realized I'd been carrying that suitcase around my whole life, packed with expectations, regrets, things I should have thrown out years ago. I tried to shake it off the next morning. I took a walk through the town, past a dilapidated church with stained glass windows cracked like spiderwebs, past houses with chipped paint and shuttered porches. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered black coffee, and pulled out the old green notebook. I opened it to the letter I'd written but never sent. The words felt heavier now. Asterisk, we stopped seeing each other long before we said goodbye. Was that true? Had we really stopped, or had I just stopped trying? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the man sitting across from me until he spoke. "You Ira?" I looked up. He was older, late 50s, worn jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. There was something familiar in his eyes, like a half-remembered dream. "I am," I said cautiously. He nodded. "Name's Carl. I knew your parents back in the day." Carl smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're carrying a lot you don't even know about," he said quietly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, lowering his voice like it was a secret meant just for me. There are things in your family's past, things that might explain a lot about what you're feeling now. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, Carl was gone, slipping out the door and into the afternoon light. I sat there, heart hammering. What secrets could he possibly know? And why had no one ever told me? That night, back in the motel, I dug through old boxes I'd shipped ahead. I pulled out letters from my mother, crumpled photos of family gatherings, a faded birthday card from my father. I found something else tucked between the pages of an old photo album, a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was a letter, but not from either of my parents. The handwriting was elegant, careful. The words were cryptic. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means the past has caught up with you. There are things you don't know, about your family, about what really happened all those years ago. Trust no one too quickly. The truth is buried deeper than you think. I sat back, the letter trembling in my hands. Why had I never heard this before? Who had left it for me? And what truth was buried so deep? For the first time in months, the suitcase in my mind shifted. Not the weight of regrets or memories, but something heavier, something unresolved. The next morning, I drove out of Tallow Creek, the letter folded carefully in my jacket pocket. I didn't know what was waiting in Eastgate, but I knew one thing. This trip wasn't just about finding peace anymore. It was about uncovering the shadows I'd been running from. Eastgate didn't announce itself with a welcome sign or a bustling main street. It crept up on me like a whispered secret, quiet, shadowed, almost reluctant to be found. The road narrowed, flanked by towering pines that swallowed the afternoon light. I kept the window down, letting the cool air carry the scent of damp earth and pine needles. It was the kind of air that made you remember things you'd rather forget. I drove slower now, the map folded again and tucked into my jacket. 3 towns behind me, but Eastgate felt different, like the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. My motel room was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew. A cracked window rattled with the breeze. I unpacked methodically, pulling out the notebook with the unsent letter, the mysterious cryptic note, and the map. I poured myself a cup of instant coffee and sat at the small, wobbly table. The creak of the chair echoed in the stillness. I thought about Fallon again. About the suitcase full of memories I hadn't unpacked. Maybe the Real journey was to finally open that suitcase. To face whatever was hidden inside. The next morning, I decided to visit the one place everyone in Eastgate seemed to avoid, the old house on Ashwood Lane. It was a 2-story Victorian, paint peeling, windows boarded, overgrown with ivy and neglect. Kids in town whispered about it like it held ghosts. I wanted to see for myself. I found the house half hidden by trees, a crooked fence sagging in front. The air around it felt thicker, heavier, like time had stopped here. I circled the yard, heart pounding, noticing a small mailbox barely hanging on the fence post. It had no name, just the word, Morrison, scratched faintly. Morrison. My mother's maiden name. A sudden noise behind me, a sharp rustling. I spun around, half expecting a wild animal, but it was just a man stepping out from behind a tree. He was older, with weathered skin and piercing eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Looking for answers? He asked, voice low. I nodded. He introduced himself as Jacob, a local historian who'd spent years documenting Eastgate's forgotten stories. Some stories aren't meant to be told, he said, glancing back at the house. Jacob told me the house had belonged to my grandparents. They vanished years ago under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was an accident, a fire, a disappearance. But the town believed otherwise. He leaned in closer. There were secrets hidden in that house. Secrets about your family. Secrets that some people still want to keep buried. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Why didn't anyone tell me this? I asked, voice barely a whisper. Jacob shrugged. Sometimes, the truth is too dangerous. Sometimes silence is easier. That night, back in the motel, I couldn't sleep. The house. The fire. The disappearance. My parents' faces flashed through my mind, happier times, smiles that felt like they belonged to strangers. I opened the photo album again. Between the pages, I found a small key taped to the back of a faded photograph of my grandparents' house. A key. Was it for that house? And if so, what did it unlock? I spent the next morning searching the town records, piecing together what I could. There were strange entries, lost documents, incomplete investigations, whispers of a hidden room. A secret that had never been found. And then a letter slipped through my motel door. No handwriting, no signature, just a plain envelope with one word on it. Asterisk, stop. I held the letter in my hands, heart pounding. Someone was watching. Someone knew what I was doing. And they didn't want me to find out the truth. I was standing at a crossroads, between silence and discovery, between fear and courage. I had to decide. Keep digging, or walk away before it swallowed me whole. The morning light came too quickly, scraping through the threadbare curtains like a warning. I stared at the unopened envelope on the motel desk, the single word, stop, burning into my mind. Who had left it? And how much did they know? I shoved the letter into my jacket pocket, the weight of it heavy with unspoken threats. I wasn't about to stop. Not now. Not when the answers felt so close they almost whispered in my ear. After a quick breakfast at the dusty diner down the street, I drove back to the old Morrison house on Ashwood Lane. Jacob's words echoed, asterisk secrets hidden in that house, asterisk. It was the only clue I had left. I approached the front door cautiously. The wood was swollen from years of rain, the lock rusted but still intact. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Heart racing, I pushed the door open. Inside was thick with dust and the smell of damp wood. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight. Shafts of light broke through boarded-up windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing like ghosts. I called out, but only silence answered. The house felt alive, a breathing relic of the past. Paint peeled from the walls in curling strips. Wallpaper faded to ghostly patterns. I moved through the room slowly, every step stirring memories I didn't understand. In the parlor, I found a heavy desk covered in yellowed papers and old photographs. One photo caught my eye, a family portrait, but someone was scratched out. A woman, I guessed, my grandmother maybe? My fingers brushed the papers, finding handwritten notes in a shaky script, references to asterisk, the room behind the wall. I scanned the walls, searching for anything unusual. Near the fireplace, I noticed a faint seam in the plaster, almost invisible. I pressed gently, and part of the wall shifted inward. My heart jumped. A hidden door. Inside was a narrow, dust-choked passage leading down a flight of creaky stairs. I grabbed my flashlight from the car and descended slowly. The air grew colder, damp. At the bottom, a small room. Shelves lined with old trunks, boxes, and a battered metal safe. I rifled through the trunks. Inside, I found letters tied with faded ribbons, brittle and yellow with age. They told a story I hadn't expected. My grandparents had been hiding something. A scandal, a betrayal, a secret that might have destroyed them if it ever came out. There were mentions of debts, dangerous deals, and a man named Silas, a name I'd never heard before. The safe, however, was locked tight. No combination. No clues. Frustrated, I pocketed the letters and tried to leave, but as I turned, a floorboard creaked loudly behind me. I froze. Someone else was down here. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it toward the sound. No one. Just shadows. But I knew I wasn't alone. I bolted up the stairs and out of the house, heart pounding, chest tight. That night, back in my motel, I tried to make sense of it all. Who was Silas? What had my grandparents been involved in? And who wanted to scare me off so badly they'd leave threats at my door? Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Asterisk, leave it alone or you'll regret it. For a moment, I almost considered backing off. But deep down, I knew the truth was something I needed, even if it broke me. I remembered the letter I'd never sent to Fallon, the final chapter I'd tried to close. But this was a new chapter. One I couldn't write alone. I had to find Jacob again. I had to uncover who Silas was. And most of all, I had to find out why my family's past was shrouded in lies. Because whatever the secret was, it wasn't just history. It was still alive. Waiting. The message still burned on my phone screen as I stared out at the gray dawn. Asterisk, leave it alone or you'll regret it. Asterisk, it wasn't a warning. I was sure of it now. It was a promise. But I wasn't going to walk away. I needed Jacob's help. He was the only person who'd been part of this family's shadows long enough to know the cracks behind the polished facade. I found him at a rundown cafe, nursing a bitter coffee like it was the last thing keeping him alive. His eyes flickered with recognition, and something darker. "Ira," he said quietly, "you don't know what you're digging up." "I have to," I said. "There's something in that house, something they tried to bury." Jacob hesitated, then slid across an old envelope. Silas was my grandfather's business partner. Or at least he was supposed to be. I unfolded the papers inside. They told a story of betrayal, greed, and a deal gone wrong decades ago, one that had put Silas on the run and ruined the Morrison family name. But there was more. A name I hadn't seen before. Fallon. Jacob's voice was low. "She wasn't just your wife. She was his granddaughter. Silas's granddaughter." The room spun. Fallon? My ex-wife, the woman who walked away from me, who laughed upstairs while I dreamed of packing a suitcase I could never close, she was connected to this secret legacy all along. I left the cafe with a storm in my chest. All the pieces started falling into place. The threats, the silence, the letter I never sent. Fallon wasn't just running from me. She was running from her own past. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out the letter I'd written her months ago. The words felt heavier now. We stopped seeing each other long before we said goodbye. I realized we'd both been running from shadows neither of us fully understood. The next morning, I made one last visit to the Morrison house. The air was colder than before, sharper. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I opened the locked safe with the combination Jacob had found in an old diary, written in my grandmother's shaky hand. Inside, a bundle of letters and an old, faded photograph. It was Fallon as a little girl, smiling shyly beside a man I'd never seen. Jacob called later that day. "She wants to meet," he said. My heart tightened. We met at the same cafe, Fallon and I, two broken pieces circling each other after years of silence. She looked older, wearier. Her eyes held the weight of secrets finally shared. "I didn't tell you everything," she said quietly. "I was scared," I admitted. "But I'm here now." Fallon told me about her grandfather Silas, how he'd vanished after the family fallout, leaving debts and danger behind. How she'd kept her distance from the Morrison legacy to protect me. We talked for hours, about lies, love, loss, and the possibility of forgiveness. Neither of us had all the answers, but for the first time, we were honest. Weeks later, I moved back into the little cabin in Millmere. I started fresh, sketching again, working at the bookstore, breathing. The past was still there, but it no longer chained me. I kept Fallon's letter folded in my new notebook. A reminder that some endings aren't closures, they're new beginnings. As the sun set behind the crimson hills, I realized something important. I hadn't just walked away from Fallon. I'd walked toward myself. And that made all the difference.